All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Brown Perspective. Here's your host, Romero, with my co host, Eduardo. Eduardo, knock, knock. Are we there?
Sí, sí, aquí estoy. Buenos días, buenos días, buenos días, buenos días.
All right. So it's been a few weeks
It
now
has.
since the last podcast. And as promised, here's the next one. We're going to do a recap today of some of the things that have been going on. This news cycle is just crazy with a lot of the things that happen. You give it a week, you give it 2 weeks, and then so much goes on, so much to talk about.
Certainly. And I think that is just the reality of life right now. So much things happening. We're so connected through social media and other venues, and yet we're so disconnected from what's going on. So I'm glad we have this opportunity to try to break down, dissect, and provide some perspective on what's happening.
Cool. Yeah. And so if people out there are anything like us, every now and then people turn on the news, whether English or Spanish, and I listen a lot to the radio, to NPR. And for the last week and a half, the all the headlines have been about this impeachment um, probe or the possible impeachment of Donald Trump. So we're definitely going to spend some time talking about that. We're not going to regurgitate all of the legality of what's going on. We're just going to talk about the big picture implications and what it might mean, whether it's a good strategy or not for the Democrats to pursue impeachment. Because I have some thoughts on that.
Interesting.
We're going to today. Today is Saturday. We're here Saturday, October 5th, and so we got the unfortunate news this morning. Or I did because I hadn't checked the news yesterday. I'm not sure when the news came out about Bernie Sanders having had a heart attack in Vegas. So he is out of the hospital now. But we do want to talk a little bit about that because that's just throwing a wrench into whatever plan and outlook every single strategist had for what's going to happen in the Democratic primary. This is throwing a wrench into all of that. So they're going to have to regroup and figure out how they're going to proceed and how they're going to, some people, how they're going to exploit this, and others, how they're going to try to recover and control the narrative around what happened, right? To make sure that people don't freak out. So I'm going to spend some time talking on that about that. And then, Eduardo, you want to take the other two topics with the UN and then the David Koch?
Yeah, so I think the next topic that I think is all consuming because we're talking about climate change. And I know there's been a couple of developments recently. As you alluded to, the UN meeting on climate change was not too long ago. And the young activist Greta sort of put the world leaders on notice as to how the younger generation is feeling about the issue. Then we also had the passing of David Koch, somebody who actually, and his brother, who were able to single-handedly transform the Republican and conservative agenda around climate. And then obviously there's other things happening like the fires in the Amazon and the implication that has not only in Latin America but across the world.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for that. So those are the two things that we'll get to at the end. We will definitely try to be mindful of the time. So to give each one of those topics their due time. But I do think that the Trump impeachment might take a little bit longer. So we'll try to make sure that we don't get too caught up in it because there's always a ton to talk about with Trump. And whenever there's a new headline with Trump, or whenever I have to, let's say I get caught up in doing something and I get distracted from the news for a few days, and then I come back and I see a headline about Trump. It's always like a face palm. It's like, what the hell is this guy up to? What the hell is this guy up to now?
Yeah.
And like otra vez ahí vamos con este. And it's always like that. So now this Trump impeachment, it's like, all right, here we go again. So what's going on now, right? And just a quick recap about, I'm sure most people know what's going on with the impeachment, but just a quick recap. So there's a whistleblower that came forward, and he said that Trump was using his powers to solicit foreign help to discredit one of his main rivals, which is Joe Biden. And the allegation is that Joe Biden used some of his political leverage to try to get some type of sweetheart deal for his son, which is I believe he's on the board of a
It
company in
used to be,
Ukraine.
yeah.
Yeah, he used to be in the board of a company in Ukraine. I forget exactly what company that is. Do you know?
Yeah, it's right there, Burisma Group.
Here it is. Burisma Group. 26 Biden's son Hunter, who served on the board of Burisma Group, an energy company in Ukraine. They contended that using the levers of diplomatic engagement to dig up dirt on political rivals and abuse of power and raises questions about whether the president's actions amount to illegal soliciting of campaign assistance from a foreign country. So that's the gist of it. And again, if somebody wants a thorough breakdown of this there's plenty of articles that have been written about it. There's plenty of news stories. But like I said earlier, I want to get into whether or not this is the right political calculation for the Democrats
Hmm.
because look, we know that they've been trying to impeach Trump for a long time.
Yes.
And they started first with the whole Russiagate. And, funny enough, you don't hear anything about Russiagate anymore because there was nothing there that they could use to try to mount something as drastic as an impeachment. So now they have this. But you can already tell based on like both sides, how both sides argue that this, if anything, is going to be a really long, drawn out process. And it's very
Hmm.
unlikely that they're going to get an impeachment out of this because again there's a procedure you have to follow, and by the time you could end up impeaching Trump, it could be already the end of his term, right? So I think the political calculation from the Democrats is that they can use this to hurt Trump in his bid for re-election.
Definitely, but I think knowing the Teflon Don, I think he may be able to turn it around. And I think, as you were saying, I think part of the problem of the whole impeachment conversation is that since he took office, a certain segment of the Democratic Party were calling for his impeachment. So it's almost in some ways, it feels like, oh, this is like the third time they're trying to impeach Trump over something. But then, in typical Trump fashion, he is now going further. So similarly to how he started his presidential campaign talking smack, or not smack, being racist, making racist comments about Mexicans and standing by them, where most candidates would have retracted those comments. He went 110%. And now he's doing the same thing here. So not only did there's tape and there's proof that he was pressuring the Ukrainian president to dig dirt on his political rival, but now he asked China to step in, and that's just crazy, right? Like he's inviting one of our economic and to a certain extent political enemies, and maybe enemies is too big of a word because I think we're definitely more interrelated than we used to be. But obviously, they represent a communist, socialist vision, authoritarian vision, and we know for now, some of us still think that the U.S. represents a democratic vision. But anyways, it looks like he's trying to just rally his base. So now it will be a matter of how really independents or some of his supporters react to everything that's going on.
And it's not like he's done this. It's not like he hasn't done this before, because you mentioned now he's asking the Ukrainian government and even the Chinese to look into his political opponents. But remember during his first election that he was asking if he made a comment about like maybe Putin could use his hacking to look into Hillary Clinton, and
Exactly.
he did get some blowback from that. But see, nothing hurts this guy because he doesn't pretend to be like a moral figure, and that he doesn't
Yeah.
pretend to be above these things. That's one of the reasons why of his appeal to people, because at least he doesn't pretend. And so whether or not they have enough, like the shock that he's doing this should not shock anyone. The question is, do they have a legal basis for trying to go through with impeachment? And there's another angle to this that maybe we can discuss, which is what's the likelihood that he's intentionally doing this, that the whistleblower is essentially following directions from Trump to create
Mm.
this entire chaos, to essentially bait the Democrats into trying to impeach him. Because if you have been following what's been going on with the economy and the stock market,
Mm-hmm.
it's this it's not really growing. It's not getting terribly bad, but there's definitely signs that it's slowing down. And his message that the economy is great and that we're going to have a great economy, then I don't know if that's going to ring with his base. I know that they say the unemployment is low.
It's
like
low, yeah, the lowest it's
3.5.
been. I mean, but that's the amazing thing about this current economy. There's so much uncertainty, so many other factors that are seem to be going in the wrong direction. But
Right.
right now, there seems to be okay.
Right. And the thing with these unemployment numbers is that, okay, well, what's the quality of the jobs that people are getting? Just because
Hmm.
they're employed, does that mean that they're able to make enough money to pay the rent, pay the bills, and then do whatever else, buy food? And is that enough to get them to live comfortably where they feel that, yeah, the economy is doing a lot better? We don't know that. We just know that the unemployment number is really low. But I bet you that there's still a lot of people that are struggling with this. And also, I think with the unemployment numbers, they don't count you. If you stop looking
If
for
you
a
start
job
looking
after a
for a
certain
job,
amount of time, they just don't count you in the numbers anymore, right? So
yeah,
it's real that the economy is still not working for a lot of people. And if Trump, he can't come in and say, and because remember 4 years ago or three years ago when he ran, he kept saying that the economy is not what it seems, that a lot of people are hurting, and that was his appeal. But he
yeah,
can't do that this time around. So maybe he just needs another distraction. And the thing is with the impeachment, one of my concerns is that the way the Democrats are going about it, if it is this really long drawn out process where every single day it's headlines and headlines, it may actually turn off a lot of people from this, and it may actually work in Trump's favor because you have to remember the people that are voting progressive or liberals, they're already set on voting anything but Trump, and then those that are
hmm
conservative that vote on like single issues like abortion, gun law, gun control, and even the religious groups, they're gonna vote for Trump, despite the fact that they may not agree with a lot of the things that he's doing. They may not like what he's doing here because they don't want a liberal progressive in the White House. They'll just vote for Trump. So what they're really after is these guys in the middle. This mainly probably like mid level conservatives or even some of the more conservative ones. Yeah,
moderate
moderate conservatives.
Democrats.
They're trying to get these guys um, essentially to swing over to the Democrats and vote for some of these progressives. But these guys, like, look, they're very cynical of the entire process to begin with. They don't. They know that these politicians, that a lot of them, that the lobbyist comes in, and then that the corporations have a ton of control over them. So they already know that's how the game works. A lot of them. And Trump doesn't really pretend that much that he is above all that, but the Democrats do. The Democrats come out and they pretend like, we're here for you. We hear that you're hurting, and they pay lip service to all of these things. And the people, when they're hearing this, they're like, that's BS because we already know that both of you guys work the same way. Now the Democrats come around and try to impeach Trump because they're claiming the high moral authority. It may backfire because the voters might say, well, we don't really believe you guys. You're using this as a political tool anyway just to get our votes. We're going to
Yeah.
side with Trump because you're attacking him.
Well, yeah, but I think that's where the process, and to your point, it becomes both a tool and a hindrance to that, because in order for the process to be legitimate, and at least to people who are going to look at it um, and take the time to understand, okay, this is what happened, and this is the evidence, and this is how the investigation was conducted, are looking for a fair process, and then obviously ultimately will be up to the Senate to decide whether or not to remove him. But to your point, if it by the time everything happens is re-election time, people are going to decide whether to vote or vote against him. So I think one person that we haven't talked about so far is Nancy Pelosi, and I think that as we talked about from the beginning, she had progressives calling for the impeachment of Trump, and she decided to take her time. And I think what triggered the proceeding, the official proceeding investigation, is the fact that she has extensive experience in the foreign intelligence or the intelligence committee. So she spent almost 2 decades in the committee, and she actually was the one who wrote the the whistleblower law that this complaint was filed under.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, she knows her stuff. She was patient, understanding that if you are going to conduct a legitimate impeachment proceeding, you need something substantive. And I think she and others the chairman and yeah, the chairman of the committees see this as something that is beyond what is permissible behavior for a president. And the other point that I wanted to make is how problematic it is that the president, and to your point, and I think I hadn't thought about, what about if this is just a larger scheme to distract people from what's going on in the economy and elsewhere. But what's problematic about what the president, how he's trying to discredit and attack the whistleblower. And I think that gets to the more fundamental concern I have about this administration, about really this destroying the institutions and the respect for the rule of law, the respect for, you know, the whistleblower protection, that is so important for
Well,
these types of complaints
well,
to
at least the
to be
appearance of
brought
it,
up.
right? Like he doesn't
Yeah, the
follow.
appearance
He
of it.
doesn't
Yeah.
follow the formalities that they have to present this front that we do follow the rule of law. Because if that's the case, then where are the protections for someone like Edward, not Edward Snowden, but Julian Assange? Because essentially he's a whistleblower too, but he's not getting any of the
Well,
same protections that a whistleblower.
no, because he helped a whistleblower.
Right, right,
Uh,
but sorry, not as a whistleblower, but Julian Assange is no different than like the New York Times or the Washington Post that is releasing information that was given to him, right? But yet we go on a witch
yeah,
hunt for him.
yeah, well, yeah, but and I think that's the thing. But people see Julian Assange and the New York Times or Washington Post as different entities.
Right, but that's
But the
that's what I'm telling you. That's the appearance that's the formality and the appearance that they want to project. And Trump doesn't follow that. Trump tears down that facade. But a lot of
Yeah,
people understand that it's a facade. But in this case, the Democrats are angry. They're saying we don't like the fact that you don't play by the rules that we have established, right? And we look, there's a lot big part of the country that understands that there's the two systems. There's a legal system for those that don't have any power, for the poor, and
hmm,
then there's a legal system for these guys in power that doesn't really apply because they get away with a
yeah,
lot of things. And Trump is tearing down that facade because now he's going after whistleblowers, after this whistleblower, which he shouldn't. But it's not like we haven't done it before. It's not like if it were somebody else, those in power wouldn't find a way to hunt down this person and do it. It's just that when they're this time when Trump is doing it to one of their own, that's why they get all upset. And
yeah,
I guess the reason why I'm saying this is because this is the mindset of the people that are, or at least like from what I see from all of the other channels and like independent journalists that I see, this is their message, right? And so if the Democrats think that they can get these people to vote for them based on the fact that they're trying to impeach Trump, then they have something else coming, and they may even lose the next election to Trump because of trying to pull this political stunt.
yeah. No, I agree, and I think, and going back to your comment on it, it is somewhat a facade, but I think that, you know, there's a reason why freedom of expression, and I know, you know, it got it to the first um, Bill of Rights, right? So like, there's a reason why the founding fathers, not all of them, some of them wanted to protect the freedom of expression, the freedom of the press. And I agree with you. I think there's been instances where we haven't lived up to those values, but the bottom line is you need to protect the law, right? And you realize that sometimes the law is used to protect certain interests, but just like, you know, at the turn of the century, they were able to pass a law to take care of the big monopolies that were threatening to destroy our environment, to destroy our country. So I think there's critical points in our history where the rule of law and the ideals that we stand for need to be protected. To your point, not a lot of people see that argument in these terms, and I think what
Because it's selective protection of the law, right? That's I think I'm with you that it does need to be enforced, and we need to have the rule of law, but it needs to be enforced consistently, not selectively, and that's really the distinction.
yeah, I agree, and I think what's happening now, you know, the and I think the good point is that the Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, and all who are involved in an investigation know that they have to do a thorough investigation. They need to, dot their I's and cross their T's, and then they need to present that. And I agree with you, like it may backfire on them, but I think their job is to do the process the best they can. And then if articles of impeachment are passed by the House, then it's up to the Senate. And actually, I was surprised that Senator Majority Leader McConnell said that if the House sent articles of impeachment, the Senate would take them on. And I think they need to because of Senate rules. But I wanted to get to the point that what's going to be critical, and you mentioned this earlier today, it's because this is really not about the morality of Donald Trump and the people who support him. This is about the morality of the conservatives and people in the middle who have an option, right? They either stay silent and don't vote, or they vote for him just because he's helping advance their agenda, or they vote against him because they realize that he is no bueno for our country and our democracy. And obviously, and I know this is internally within the Democratic Party, this is what has a lot of people um, fighting, right? So do you go with a Bernie Sanders, an Elizabeth Warren who stand for progressive ideals, or do you go with a Joe Biden who is more of a middle of a road known entity who has proven throughout his career to be able to work with Republicans, and obviously now you have two very distinct trajectories, and which one do you choose?
Right, and thanks for bringing up Joe Biden because um,
Uncle
Uncle
Joe.
Joe, middle of the road. Another word that you can describe to another word you can use to describe him is like he's essentially a sellout. He's sold out to the political establishment, and he's right in the middle, which means that he's gonna please both
Damn.
sides. And if anything, I do think that Joe Biden would probably have the best chance of beating Trump because
You think so?
well, yeah, because he's right in the middle. Like he's
Hmm.
for war. He's probably going to go with a lot of Republican policies, just the way that Obama did too, right? So these guys, he might
Whoa, what? You talking smack about
Uncle
the
Joe
greatest president ever?
do well. Of course, man. Like, what did these guys ever? What did they do about the foreign wars? Did they stop them? No, they just continued them, and those wars were supposed to be Bush's wars, Republican wars. So what I'm saying is that these guys they use the language of progressives and they use the language
Yeah.
of liberals, but they don't really follow those ideals. And so Joe Biden is your typical prototype, like after following Obama, which he's gonna play lip service to all these things, and then he might get some of these conservatives to go with him because they already know that he's gonna be pro business and all this other stuff. And if anything, that's why I think that he could take away votes from Trump. And maybe that's also assuming that Trump is not orchestrating this whole whistleblower thing. And if it is, the whistleblower came forward, then it is what Trump was trying to do with the Ukraine president was tarnish Joe Biden's chances. Because
Yeah.
if you get rid of Joe Biden, then what's left is Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. But now after Bernie Sanders is news, it's probably going to be Elizabeth Warren, and it's really easy for Trump to run against someone that he's going to try to label a socialist because he's just going to scare the hell out of his base. All these socialists are going to come in here, they're going to give everything away, they're going to destroy your country, they're going to bring in immigrants, and like it's really easy to that message is very simple for him.
Yeah.
I feel like it would be a little bit harder against Joe Biden because Joe Biden, I don't even know what he stands for, to be honest, because he
But
claims to stand for me, but I don't really, a lot of people don't see it that way.
I think that's precisely the problem with Joe Biden. Like I think that not knowing where he stands doesn't get anybody excited, and I think that's what happened with the with Hillary Clinton's campaign. Right? People felt that she's a all-time politician. She has a lot of baggage. I'm not excited about her as I am with Bernie, who has been consistent. So I think that's a challenge, right? Because I think we're living in an age. I'm sorry, my ESL is coming out today. We live in an age where the reason that Trump won, it wasn't because he was the best candidate. He was able to rally the troops and build his base and build support and get enough people to go along with him. So in some ways, is the battle of extremes. So and that's what's challenging right now because you need a motivated base, and you really don't need that many votes to win the presidency or win the nomination. Let's start with the nomination because you have so many candidates, and I feel and I believe this was part of our last conversation that in some ways that Democrats are going through what the Republican went through the last cycle. So that's a challenge, right? And I feel somebody like Elizabeth Warren would be better prepared to not only have an excited base, and if she does become the progressive candidate, to bring on the progressives, but also because she has um, working class roots. She's very articulate. She's very clear about the policies that she supports. I think she'll be able to build a broader base of support. And she's a woman. Let's not forget that women kind of have been attacked under this president. But then the other point that I wanted to make was that the reason why Obama, why uh, you know Clinton, or any president has gotten into office has not been able, or even Lyndon Johnson, not being able to pass all of these progressive legislation that they wanted to pass is because they're entrenched interest that fight against that, right? So I think that that's part of the problem. That yes, you can have a candidate that says all these things, that wants to get all these things done, but once you get into office, you deal with the reality that you have members of Congress who are tied to particular industries or particular interests, and unless your power base can outpower that, you're not going to get things done, and that's where you get to compromise. And I know it sounds like a dirty word, but that's how our system operates, right? You need to compromise, but at least try to get to a better place where that than where you are now. Did I lose you?
No, I'm here. Just no, I agree with you. I think the problem I saw with Obama a lot is that he, in his attempts to compromise and to please the other side, he didn't stand up enough for his base. So he went to the negotiating table. He didn't go aggressive enough. He tried to give too much to arrive at some middle ground. But in a sense, then if your compromise is essentially you're not standing up to the values and the ideals that you promise your people, then you're just essentially some person that is there and is trying to please both sides, and uh, you end up with terrible uh, policies that get passed, like the healthcare law. Like, I liked it when he was talking about a single payer system. Why did he back down from that? And
Well,
why did he give in to? Because he had to compromise, right?
yeah,
Um, but he's compromised way too much. I think that part of it. And then my biggest concern with these Democrats is that they're all pro-war also. And I don't like
mm,
that. We don't have a Democratic Party anymore that is against war. So anyway, I think that do you want to talk a little bit about Bernie Sanders? Let's tie it into this, since it is related and relevant to the Democratic primary. We mentioned Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and I haven't checked the latest polls, but I think that Elizabeth Warren was already ahead. I don't know by how big of a margin. Do you know
yeah,
what
and
the margin?
no, I don't know margin, and you may be able to look it up right now, but I know she had a very successful third quarter fundraising. I think she raised over $20 million, which I think solidifies her position as the as the Democratic one of the Democratic front runners. And to say all that, I have to say that I'm a little disappointed that the Joaquin Castro or Julian Castro.
Yeah,
See, that's a problem. I don't know which one it is.
it is the
Uh,
brothers.
but the thing is, it's unfortunate that we only have one Latino candidate, viable Latino candidate, and perhaps not as viable. I think he may have viability as a vice presidential candidate, but he still has some a lot of growing to do. But I commend him, and I support him for throwing his name in the ring. And the other thing, I mean, not only are Democrats paying lip service to a lot of issues, but I think when it comes to representation of their political base, that's where they're struggling. The Republicans had two Latino senators running for the presidency, and whether we like them or not is a different story. But the Republican Party has done a better job of empowering their Latino support base compared to the Democrats.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, these Castro brothers from Texas. I don't think we've seen the last of them. From what
Yeah,
I
he's still
heard,
young.
yeah, from what I heard from him, especially his stance on immigration, and I like the fact that he didn't back down from it. That he said, "Look, it's a really charged issue right now. It's very polarizing." But he came out and he came out on the side of uh, a way how to change how people think about it, how to treat it, and how to view the immigrants themselves. And I like that he stood up for that. It didn't win him a lot of votes with a lot of people, but at least like that shows me that this is a guy that stands for what he believes in, at least right now, right until he
Yeah.
decides that he may need to sell out to get more votes. But that's the problem. So
It's a
so
popularity contest, Romero. What you want?
yeah, that's the problem, really. That part of me understands that if you're gonna get most people to go with you, then you have to try to give each one something. But anyway, so she's at 27. Biden is at 25. What's the timestamp on
Ooh.
this? It says here. No, that's the rally. That's the rally. That doesn't say. Anyway, I'm sure this is pretty recent, and so Biden's not that far behind, despite everything that's been going on. And the thing is that this guy, he's like deer in the headlights. Has he come out to fight this? Has he said, no, 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 that's not true? But I haven't heard anything about Biden.
No,
And he's
he's
just
kind
getting
of being
bullied on
careful, and
this.
I think there's some concerns about what. But I think it sounds like his son
Well,
tried to go smart about try to be smart about his leveraging of his position, but obviously it does.
um,
I think he's letting Trump just
but I'm concerned
do
about
his thing.
this strategy though, because I think what the political calculation for Biden was that, hey man, don't go out there and say anything because you don't want. Let's just let it die out. You don't want people talking about it. You don't want them asking you questions about it. Don't say anything about it. Just Trump is saying, and let the impeachment go. The impeachment will shift the focus away from you towards Trump and the impeachment. So
Hmm.
don't even mention it. So that tells me that this guy Biden, there might be something to hide there. Because if there wasn't anything there, there was absolutely nothing, right?
Yeah.
And he'd be out there. Like, no way. Like, okay, Biden would be out there like, okay, this guy, I don't know where he's making these fabrications. I don't know what's going on. He can, if he wants proof, then he can look for proof. He'd be out there, fighting back, but he's not because it's a political calculation. Just don't mention it because if you start mentioning it, more people may look into it. Anyway, okay, so Sanders is at 16. So he was already down. So he lost a lot of the steam from 4 years ago. And
Hmm.
I'm not exactly sure what happened. It he because 4 years ago he was the guy. I mean, he could have even started his own. He could have gone independent, and he would have gotten a ton of voters. And now he's losing out to even Biden and Elizabeth Warren. Which, by the way, Elizabeth Warren, I do think she's a strong candidate. I do think her message is very similar to Sanders. I have one big criticism about her, which is when the was it in South Dakota when the water protectors were protesting against that pipeline, and
Oh yeah.
they brought in the SWAT or the police officers to essentially open up the water hose on them and
Standing
disperse them.
Rock.
Like she said nothing, man. She stood by and she pretends to stand for the people. Absolutely nothing from her. And so I was like,
Hmm.
well, what, you're trying to tell me that you're this progressive woman that cares about people and all this stuff. And then she didn't say anything. So again, political calculation, right? So, but of all the candidates, to me, this would probably, actually, no, my favorite candidate is Tulsi Gabbard, not Elizabeth Warren, but I'll take Elizabeth Warren. So anyways, Bernie Sanders,
Wait. You can just not just say that and not say more. So why is she your candidate?
because she's the only one that's coming out against all these illegal wars that we're in. And
Okay.
she's the only one that talks about it. She's the only one that said, "Hey, if you're gonna claim that Assad is gassing his people, where's the evidence?" And then she said that, and they're like, "Oh, you're anti-American, you're anti-patriotic," which they do with everyone else. She's the only one that's coming out and speaking to something that I'm passionate about. And
Hmm.
because she did that, you should see the hit pieces when she goes on the Stephen Colbert show or when she goes on all these shows. They immediately start attacking her.
Mm.
immediately, and you can see right away that this is not a candidate that the establishment wants. Like they wouldn't
She's a
tolerate
veteran
someone like
too,
her. Sorry.
and she's a veteran too.
Exactly. That's why they just want to face her out, and yeah. So anyway, so she is really the one. I know her biggest point is, or at least the point that they attack her on, is the war, because all she did was question. I was like, wait a minute. So you're telling me that we're gonna go to war or invade someone just based on this? We don't even know if it's conclusive evidence or not. Then they attack her. They say she's pro Assad, and they say all these things about her. But I do know that, so she has other policies that I do align with, but at the same time, the one that I like the most about her is the one, her stance on the war, because nobody else says anything about that. Oh
Mm.
crap! So sorry. So Elizabeth Warren. So I want to stay on focus because we still have two other things to talk about. So the Bernie Sanders gets a heart attack, and it looks like he's out now. He's says he's feeling great. If they caught it early enough, then I think he should be okay. He is 78, but you catch a heart attack on time. You go in there and they need to do what they need to do. Then they'll monitor him, and if he takes care of himself, he should be okay. The problem is that a heart attack, especially for someone that's 78 years old, that's terrible because that's just reminding people of his mortality.
Yeah.
And someone at 78 years old is very close to the end in people's minds. And this on its own, even if none of the candidates jumped on it to try to use it as a political tool, if nobody jumps on it, this is going to hurt Sanders, unfortunately, because that's just the way that people are wired to think. You can count on Trump to use it directly if Sanders were the nominee.
Yeah.
I don't know Elizabeth Warren and Biden how they're going to mention it. They may choose not to say anything. Maybe they'll have others that are on their campaign say something to the effect. Either way, though, it's not good for Sanders. I think that he's going to have a really hard time climbing back up on the polls and beating out someone like Elizabeth Warren on this.
I agree, and it's unfortunate because obviously, medically, may be able to continue to do a great job in the campaign and as president. Um, but unfortunately, as human beings, we just, that little nugget of information, and particularly for people who are not passionate supporters for him, just kind of have that, that, oh, he had a heart attack. This guy's not ready. He's 78. He's gonna go under any time. So I know, unfortunately, that's just the bias that many of us have against older
You, you,
folks, although they may be able to still, he maybe still be able to perform very effectively, not only because of his own ability, but the people around him who can execute the work and the agenda. But so yeah, so we'll see how, and so I think his campaign will have uh, an interesting time figuring out how they move forward or try to stay in the run.
do you think that's a form of ageism?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it is to a certain extent because I know that the issue has come up for him. It has come up for Biden and even Elizabeth Warren, who I think is 70. So American society, our society for most part is very very enthusiastic about youth, right? And if you think about it, I think the whole reason why, one of the main reasons why Barack Obama got the nomination back in 2008 was because he was the younger uh, candidate. He was younger, hip. Yes, he was a person of color, but I think he was able to gather the support because people kind of look to him as that youthful president. Um, so yeah, so I think there's definitely some ageism, and when you think about it, in the Constitution it does say that you need to be of a certain age to be president, but understanding that the mortality rate back in those days was very different from what it is now. People are living to be 100 nowadays because of the advances and everything that's happening, but unfortunately, people still have a negative bias against older adults.
Do you think you would have more bias if Bernie Sanders were 98 years old and he was still running? But if all the doctors told you, yeah, he seems fine, his mind is there, he can walk, he can perform all of the functions that a president needs to perform, would you feel the same if it was 98 versus 78? Because we do know that the life expectancy, mm, once you get to 98, it's very few people that make it that far.
Yeah, no, I mean 98. That's a whole different story. I
But
mean
if right, but
78.
but if so, then that wouldn't be ageism then to say, well, he's 98, I'm not going to vote for him.
Well, I guess it depends, right? So if he's 98 and still on the campaign trail and still
Hmm.
has, if he still is able to come across as a viable candidate, why not, right?
I think if he was 98 and still doing that, we have to order an investigation because he'd probably be a cyborg or something.
That's true.
A robot took over him.
That's
Um,
true.
I don't know. I asked you about ageism because I know it's somewhere in there, but there's also the undeniable truth that once you get to a certain age, things are more likely to break down. And so he had a heart attack. He seems fine. He can recover, but it's the machinery has more miles on it, and it's more
N-
likely to suffer or to undergo another breakdown in the near future versus a younger person. Now, a younger person can always walk out and get hit by a bus. That's true. But
Or have even
natural,
an unhealthier lifestyle
yeah,
than
unhealthy
the older
lifestyle.
person.
But a natural progression, natural degradation, natural decay, because the body itself is always undergoing that. It is more likely to happen to a 78-year-old. Maybe that's ageism. I don't know, but it's like it like I said, it's a little bit of ageism, but it's also a little bit of just this is just reality. And if you have a 78-year-old that had a heart attack, most people are going to think there's another one down the corner, maybe a year, 2 years. So that may play into it. And I don't have the right answer. I know that
Yeah.
it's a gradient. There's no right or wrong answer. Um, I think I'm definitely not fully qualified to speak on that. I don't know a lot about the struggles of like those that are in that age group. Maybe at some point, if we do have someone that is over 60, maybe we can get their point of view on it.
Hmm.
But my take is that it's going to hurt him. It's not the same as if somebody tried to assassinate him, which usually helps boost poll numbers. This is like, it's not like God's trying to assassinate Bernie Sanders. You can't even spin it that way. This is
Hmm.
just stuff happens. The heart attacks happen. It's a natural. It's a
Yeah,
natural.
no, and it's a reality of life. And I think, when John Kennedy, President Kennedy was in office, he had a lot of back issues and a lot of health issues that the public just didn't know about
Right.
because of how well he hit them and his administration hit them. Even when you think about FDR, right? He was
Yeah.
paraplegic, but most of the populace didn't know that he was right, that he had polio. They just saw him as a strong
Yeah.
man who helped the country get through a world war and a depression in a world war. So I think the issue of health is interesting because again, 78, yes, you have a heart attack. Um, and then you're going to be able to you have a lot of experience, you have a lot of experienced people around you, you are able to probably focus on the things that you need to get done, prioritize. And I think it's also a very real conversation of, hey, everybody has is going through a medical situation. So whether you're 78 and you had a heart attack, or you're 34 and you were diagnosed with breast cancer, we are all dealing with these issues. So that's why it's important we have Medicare for all. Go
Yeah.
Bernie,
Yeah.
Bernie.
Uh, Great way to um to inject that in there. By the way, did you know what the reason why I found out about the JFK's bad back is because he had a plate on his back that used to help him for posture. It wasn't like surgically inserted. I just think that it was some piece of metal probably that they put on his back and tighten it, and that helped when he was sitting down. I think it probably took away some of the pain. Did you know about that?
I don't know if I knew
So
about that. I know he was issue with his back, and I don't know if it was something else too. And
so
I think it might have
apparently,
been related to his service during World War. Was it two or was the Korean War?
Um,
Might have been the Korean War.
yeah, I do know that his brother got shot down in one of the wars, but I don't know about JFK.
Yeah, it was World War II. Yeah. So I think Joe actually he was supposed to be the one
Mm-hmm.
um, who Joseph Kennedy was grooming to be the political person, but yeah, he passed away in World War II, and then I think it fell on the
But
younger
but
Kennedys.
the thing with JFK, which is I thought it was kind of interesting and ties into what we're talking about his back problems, is I found out about it because apparently when he was assassinated, there were two shots that were fired at him. I believe
Mm.
the first one hit him on the chest or on the shoulder, somewhere on
Yeah.
there, but it wasn't a fatal blow. But because he had this plate on his back, he couldn't lean forward and put his head down. So
Oh.
he was sitting upright, and then the next shot came. That's what I heard, or
Mm.
at least I think I saw that in a documentary. I'll, again, everything that we say here, disclaimer, everything that we say here should always be fact checked, double checked. Don't take our word. Don't take anyone's word for anything. People should always double check stuff,
Yeah.
because this is the age of the internet, and you never know when it was somebody from their basement writing some piece of making up a fact that then made its way and went viral, and all of a sudden people are saying the same, repeating the same thing. But I'm pretty sure I saw that in a documentary somewhere.
That's true. But you know what? Something that you cannot deny: climate change.
There you go again.
You like how I did that, huh?
Yeah.
Set it
So
up.
what's going on with? So I didn't know anything about this until you mentioned it to me this morning. So why don't you give me? So this is a young activist, Greta Thunberg, tells global leaders she will never forgive them for failing on climate change. Let me play this clip for a few seconds,
So
and then you can fill me in on what's going on here.
listeners and viewers can get a sense for
Outrage.
her. Yeah.
I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones.
I think that's all that I'll play. Just um, people get the gist of what she's saying. So what's going on here?
So what's
I mean, I
going
know
on
what's going on, but
is
why don't you
that
fill me in on the context of the whole backstory, how she made it there, and everything? Because like I said, this is the first time that I heard about this. I've been last few days I didn't really check in on this.
yeah, and to be honest with you, I haven't had a chance to really do a deep dive on how she became an activist, but I know she's from Sweden, and I know she's been very involved since a very young age. I think she started at age 15, and I think she did a lot in her native in Sweden, in her native country, to bring about the topic. I think she was one of the main organizers of a school strike for climate change, and I think that's how she became better known across the world. And I know one of the things that she did to continue to get attention was that she sailed from her country to New York for the recent for the recent um, climate change meeting in the UN. So I think that and by the way, I think that the yacht was equipped with solar panels and underwater turbines. So so for me is I definitely appreciating her and her leadership and bringing up this issue to the forefront in the generation. The other part of me is also looking at sort of the privilege that she has to be able to do the things that she has been able to do and to take advantage of this platform. So you have a yacht that's solar and has underwater turbines. So obviously she's benefited from the support of her family, her country, um, perhaps her ethnicity as a white person has also had something to play. But the bottom line is that she to date has been the seems to have been the most one of the more effective um, spokespersons for the climate change, and particularly for the next generation. And I think that she does make a legitimate point that it's the children who are going to be dealing with the inaction in future years.
Yeah, this is. What do you think is gonna come of this petition? So she's naming 5 countries: Germany, France, Brazil, Argentina, and Turkey. They say they have failed to uphold their obligations under the Convention on the Rights of Child or Human Rights Treaty. She said her message in the global leaders, we're watching you. I mean, I definitely for shock value and for and to try to get a message out there and maybe even to pull at people's emotions. This is great, but let's see if anything comes of it because it's really hard. It's really hard to get the economic incentive has to be there for climate change for these people for us as a society to make any significant changes on it. And you know, one of the biggest incentives right now might be uh, that China has seen an opportunity to get an advantage in the electric vehicle sector. And now, because I think China has like 10 major companies producing electric cars, and that I think that's forcing other countries, especially like the US, to start rolling out fleets of electric vehicles also because otherwise they're going to fall behind.
Yeah.
And really those are the incentives that we need. It's just did you remember when it may have been a documentary, I don't know if I was reading an article, but that there was actually an upside to having the polar ice caps melt, at least for oil companies, because then they could go in there and explore and get more oil because they
Yeah,
think that
which
there's a
is
ton of.
happening right now. I mean, that's why Russia and the U.S. Um, and other countries are positioning themselves to go in there for sure.
Yeah, so then there's powerful interests that stand to benefit from climate change. And because it isn't here, because they don't experience it, because it's not something that they see every single day, to them the catastrophic effects of climate change are a remote concern. And they'll be gradual, but eventually huge you could have significant changes, but at the same time, they're not going to affect the people that have resources, because those people, like, it's not like the planet's going to burn up from one day to the other and it's going to be uninhabitable by every single human being. What's going to happen is specific places are no longer going to be habitable. And then the people that are able to move, they'll just relocate because they have resources. It's going to affect the common person.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're not going to be able to pick up and move, they're going to lose everything. Or, eventually they're not going to be able to live off the land, or there's not going to be any water, or they're going to have droughts, whatever. So it's going to affect the poor people. But that's why there's if as long as the oil corporations tend to make a profit from the polar ice caps melting and from anything else related to climate change, it's going to be a really tough. It's going to be really tough for us as a whole, as a world, to change this. I'm not a
It is,
cynic. I'm
but
just looking at it objectively.
yeah, but I mean, you got to start somewhere, and I think, I mean, climate change is such a big issue, but then if you think about some of the recent activism that young people have done here in the States around gun control and all those things, I think that it's important for to me what's exciting that young people are becoming more engaged in what's going on and sort of are exercising their voice. And I just sent you the link to another article that talks about some of the native other diverse young people who are also talking about the issue in Canada and the Amazons and things like that. So highlighting that this is not just Greta, but that there's other young people in India, Brazil,
Yeah, there's a guy from
Canada, and other
Peru.
parts.
There's a guy from Peru, right? That they flew all the way to one of these climate conventions in Europe, so that he was an indigenous person, that he could give his take on what they're seeing and what's happening to the land. And he is somebody that's actively fighting against these things. The guy from Peru, I don't know if you've seen him. I watched too many
Mm,
documentaries.
yeah.
Mm, yeah, I'm not a cynic. Like I said, I'm not a cynic when it comes to this. I mean, I look. I definitely do my part. I recycle. I'm green. I try to do compost. So I have different bins, and anything that's organic, I put it into like a compost bin, and then I go out and throw it into the yard. Even though my wife hates it because she says it's gonna attract rats and other stuff. I tell you that it's not. You know, that's as long as you do it a certain way and you don't throw certain foods in there, it should be okay. But essentially creating fertilizer, and I go throw it in the bag. So I'm trying to do my part. So not like I'm not following these things, but it's just that the look, the political interest is really tough because they control the message, and this is really good to push back against that. But these issues, people see them and then they move on, and I mean, maybe I should be more hopeful, but look at what's happening in Yemen, right? So Saudi Arabia is bombing the hell out of Yemen, and it's all political. Strategically, they want access to that port because the big move is against Iran, and you have literally a famine in Yemen, and 2 million, or I don't know how many millions of children are at risk of starvation, and we can't even stop that. I mean, our government sells weapons to Saudi Arabia, which they're using to bomb Yemenis. The poorest country in the Middle East, the smallest country, and Saudi Arabia wants to essentially like obliterate them.
Hmm.
And I mean, I'm not getting into the backstory. There are politics of opposition, but it's completely unjust. And if our country really cares about morality, if the population cares about these things, we can't even change that because there's too many interests that are making money off of that, right? Political interest. So imagine something like climate change, where these oil corporations are stand to make millions, billions, and it's not just U.S. corporations, but like all over the world. I do think, yeah, definitely we need to keep fighting, but climate change is coming one way or another. I don't think we have what, like 20 years that they said that 1 degree increase, or maybe 2 degree increase is enough to cause significant changes. Well, that's coming. I think that's coming in 10, 20, whatever, because I think it's really hard to turn these things around.
Yeah, and we're already experiencing them through, hurricanes, flooding, wildfires, and everything else. So I think it's just going to be a matter of us adapting to those conditions, and to the extent possible, trying to reverse them. And I know that's one of the reasons others want to start thinking about interplanetary travel as a way to
Dude.
start colonizing other areas. But the bottom line is that we need to your point, there's both small and large and big things that each of us can do to protect the environment. And I know there are things happening in the Amazon right now. A lot of them are driven by economic interests of the cattle industry, trying to clear out uh, the rainforest in order to have more area to graze their cattle. And
Mm-hmm.
but I think the consumer behavior, consumer demand, consumer attention, all those play a role into slowly but surely changing societal views, as well as the way that these companies do business or sell products and things like that. So I think you cannot underestimate the power that the consumer has
Yeah, and
to
also
to bring
the
about.
no, I think you're absolutely right. The the one thing that I do see that could potentially be a game changer in this is new developments in technology. I think technology is what will ultimately come to the rescue, whether it comes as a natural evolution of our technological advancements, or as as like a defense mechanism because we're on the brink and we need to develop something. And if all of a sudden nuclear power becomes more viable and more countries are doing it, or if even the 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 lifetime of a battery, right? So that cars will no longer be as dependent on oil, then economically there will not be an economic incentive anymore for companies to keep using oil if there's a cheaper alternative that's safer and cleaner. And then the consumers will start buying that, and then the companies will have to change. So that could happen if we have the technology. When
Hmm.
you mentioned the interplanetary travel, are you talking about stuff like going to Mars and then
Yeah.
terraforming, or looking for another planet that's just like Earth? Because we don't have any within our solar system.
No, I think the closest option is definitely Mars. But to
But
your point, I think that trying to get to Mars and live in Mars probably will help generate technology that can perhaps help us travel further. Maybe we'll get to the Star Trek type of of level of space travel eventually. But
that's like,
um,
yeah, that's like a, it's like a, if I think we should scratch Mars. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I think we should scratch Mars off of the plans. Like if you have a list of plans for what to do with global warming, or what to do if the planet is not habitable, you can scratch Mars off of that list, however far down it is. Plan B,
why?
C, D, because if we have the technology to go to Mars and do terraforming on a completely barren environment, then that means that we have the technology to do it here on Earth. Right? Because Earth is in a better place to do terraforming and to put it into a livable environment.
That's
Why
true.
why would we go to Mars to do that, right? The only reason where I see that we could maybe go to another planet and do that is if we have run out of resources because there's overpopulation and overcrowding here on Earth, then yeah, you could go to Mars and do terraforming. But terraforming in another planet, and that's what I'm saying. Scratch that off the option for for leaving the planet because of climate change. I think we have to
Yeah,
find a solution.
yeah. No, you're right. And I think maybe it's not for climate change, but I think it. You know, I think we since we ever since we came out of the cave, we've been wanting to go further, see what's over that mountain, see what's over that ocean, and I think there's a natural desire for humans to go to the other world, right? So you're right. You probably won't have to leave Earth to because of climate change reasons, but maybe to just explore or to expand
Yeah.
the reach of our civilization, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah. That'll just be as natural exploration, because even if we talk about what kind of spaceships we'll need to get us to further planets that are further and further away at a fast speed, that means that technology for power will be so advanced that we could start powering things here on Earth without consuming all these fossil fuels, because you can't get to another planet on gas or
on
on
diesel.
any on diesel. Yeah. It has to be a more developed technology that can last for a long time. And so again, it's a tough one, man. I agree with her. I think that the planet that she's going to inherit, and her grandkids, by the way, our kids and our grandkids as well. I
Hmm.
already have, I have a little post-it here that I've written to my son, and on it there's three big letters. Is it the first one is an I, the second one is an O, and the third one's a U, and then it
Mm.
has my name signed on it.
I owe you.
I owe you a healthy planet, because yeah, what it's very likely that the conditions that they grow up in are going to be a lot harsher than ours. And think about, oh yeah, yeah, we'd be here all day.
Yeah.
I think we had another topic for David Koch, but I think that we're pretty much on time because we've been at it for a while. Do you want to leave that for the next conversation?
Yeah, I think just real quickly, just how Greta and other young activists and other interests, right? Because there are moneyed interests behind some of this developments and discussions. There's also been moneyed interest in the other camp, and that's the denial of climate change. And I think the point that I wanted to make is that David Koch passed away. He and his brother decided that it wouldn't benefit their fossil fuel interests or businesses, um, all the regulation and talk that that Bush one was doing around the environment and the need for the United States to take a really leading role. So they were able to use their wealth to fund research groups and groups to talk about and change really the messaging around climate change and change how the Republican Party and conservatives talk about it or see it or even deny the science, the fact that it's happening. So just to point out that you're right. I mean, you have moneyed interests on both sides trying to make a case for what needs to happen, and sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not, or sometimes they just will continue to be that in that battle for who controls the narrative, the thinking, and yeah. So I think we just got to remain vigilant and continue to question and more fully understand what's going on around us.
And supporting young climate activists like Greta. I'm sure she has
and,
a page where people can go and
and you got to think. You think globally, but you act locally.
yeah, start composting, growing your
Say
own
no to drugs.
fertilizer. Just be careful with rats and other rodents.
That's true.
All right, sounds good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We'll leave it
Have a
at
good
that. All
one.
right, nos despedimos con esto. Adiós.